All right, what do you want me to talk
You
about?
started to talk a little bit about it at the barn. That
Yes,
I met you.
yes,
You mentioned that not only was there a Talmud Torah
yes.
in
There was an arbiter ring.
there was an arbitering.
Yes.
Now, is that the same as a Volksschule?
Yes,
Some people, for example, sometimes talk about a Volksschule.
yeah.
You talked about it as an arbitering.
It was called the arbiter ring. There was, they were brought here by the people that were left-leaning. You know, not all the people that came from Europe were religious or something like that. No, they weren't. First of all, the ones that really wanted to be religious, it was difficult for them to make a living because they had to work on Saturday in the factories. They could, or in the stores. If they got a job in a store, they had to work on Saturday. And the religious people refused to work on Shabbos, and that's what happened. But there were people, first of all, when they came from Europe, they were left-leaning. They did not want anything to do with religion or anything like that. People from Russia and Warsaw, and Poland, my mother used to tell me the stories that went on there. In Lublin, my mother was born in Warsaw, and when she was around 16, her parents moved from Warsaw to Lublin. That's where my mother met my father, and she used to make fun of Hamilton. She'd say, you don't know what it means to live. You don't know what excitement there can be in a community. Why, Ma, what was it? Well, she said, in Lublin, we had a big meeting hall. And she says there were hundreds and hundreds of young men and women came there. An awful lot of them were communists, plain out and out communists, she says. They had Trotsky came. She remembers Trotsky coming and speaking to them. She remembers when, what was his name? Jabotinsky came to Lublin. My father debated with him.
Really?
My father won the debate, my mother said, and when he won, they carried him around on their shoulders. He was only a kid, around 17 or 18 at that time. And she says there were times, they were such people that they would go Yom Kippur Day, she says, and eat a sandwich in front of the shul. She says, I don't have to tell you what was going on there. And they didn't have big shul like we have here. She says they were just a shul in the Hoif.
That's right.
Just in the Hoif was like the center of a plaza of where the people lived around. Everyone had their, and you didn't have to go far to a shul. Although my father told me, his mother went to the big Lublin shul. I've never been there, I don't know. But Rabbi Green did go there one time. He says it was turned into a seminary or a school or something for officers. But my grandfather, this was Zucker, Moshe Zucker. He bought a seat for my grandmother in this Lublin shul and by a window so that she could see. And that was my grandmother's pride and joy that she had the seat in the Lublin shul by a window. Anyways, to get back to what I was saying about my parents going there to this shul, go to this meeting place, my mother says it was in turmoil. My father did too, he says, because there was such problems going on there. The anti-Semitism in Poland was horrible. Poland and Russia was terrible for the Jewish people. The pogroms, that you didn't know that was going to happen. In fact, my mother told me one time that her father used to make uniforms for the officers, and one of the officers said to him, his name was Letterman, Mr. Letterman, close your shop up, take your family, keep them hidden behind doors, because there's going to be a turmoil tonight. And she says that's what happened. They never knew what was going to happen. So an awful lot of people, very clever, intellectual people, became communists.
And some of them ended up in Hamilton.
Some of them ended up in Hamilton. And they were the ones that started the Arbeiterring Schule. I can't remember the names of them. It was Zach, Manny Zach from the university.
Sure.
His father was one of them. In fact, Manny went there. He did not go to a Talmud Torah or anything, but he learned Yiddish, reading, writing, and everything at the Arbeiterring. Now that was on York Street. They had a house that they rented, and it was on the second floor. It was very nice. You know, when you come to think of it, with hardwood floor and everything. And they were very fortunate. They were, but I think we kids that had him were blessed. His name was Mr. Brick. Everybody called him Chaver Brick.
He was the single most influential teacher that you had ever met.
Right. Not only me, anybody he taught, people that he taught remembered their Yiddish. And it wasn't just the reading. He was a pedagogue. He was way ahead of his time. If you came early, he set up a table with ping pong. You know, I'm talking about 75 years ago. He had a ping pong table set up. He used to do different things for the kids. If you were good, you got this, you got that. And we all adored him. They called him, he stayed in Hamilton only about 2 or 3 years. And then he went to Toronto. And they called him Daddy Brick. And there are hundreds and hundreds of people in Toronto that remember Chaver Brick or Daddy Brick. He was a wonderful teacher.
Where was he from?
Toronto. I don't know where he was originally.
I see.
I guess he must have been a Litvak, because he had the accent of the Litvische people, not the Polish. And we learned everything there. We learned Yiddish history. We learned about Yiddish literature, all the famous writers. And if we were good, he would read us a story in Yiddish. And they were fascinating. Wonderful, wonderful stuff. And we learned Yiddish history. Did I say that? I can't remember. We learned Yiddish history, not through the biblical way, but still all our history comes from the Bible. We'd know that. Lots and lots of stuff. And they used to put on concerts. Every year, the students would put on a concert, and the parents came and everybody was happy, happy, happy. And it was a wonderful time. I didn't mind going to the shul. We used to go after school every day. And at that time, we lived on Murray Street, near the railway station. You know where Una is, whatever it is that they have there.
Yes.
And we used to walk every day after school, walk on, we used to go through the side on McNabb Street and Bay Street and go to the shul, which was on York Street. There was a shul there for about 5-6 years. After Daddy Brick left, he went to Toronto. A few other teachers came, and they did not have the charisma that he had. And besides, the Talmud Torah in Hamilton made a real effort to get rid of the shul. They made it a point. They did not want anybody from the shul. So they, as I say, they went around and they made it tough for the parents and stuff like that. And they stopped.
What were the years, the golden years of the shula that you were just talking about with this?
Daddy Brick, he wasn't a chasna.
What were those years?
Who remembers? I was about 10 years old. So now I'm going to be 82. So how long? Over 70 years ago.
When you say that they made it tough,
Yes.
what does that mean? They made
I
it
don't
tough?
know. They got at the parents.
Really?
They got after the parents, and they told them not to send the kids there and everything. And they, as I say, they made it tough for them.
Right.
Now, I don't know if the police or anything got into it, but anyways, they left. They left Hamilton.
Arbiter Ring left.
The Arbiter Ring left Hamilton, but there was an organization called the Arbiter Ring here in Hamilton, and a lot of the men belonged to it, a lot of them. It was like a society,
Sure.
you know. And they had a women's group called, what is it called now? Mrs. Vunken, may she rest in peace. You wouldn't know Mrs. Vunken.
No, but I heard of her son.
Her son was a wrestler,
Right.
but she had other children too. Mrs. Vunken
I
and
knew her daughter.
you did. Shulamit.
Sure.
Shulamit. Mr. and Mrs. Vunken. They were personas. When they walked into a room, you knew they were there. First of all, he was over 6 foot tall. I mean, you don't get very many Jewish people over 6 foot tall, and the way he was built. And she was almost as tall as him, also a woman. I forgot what they named, but they had a ladies' auxiliary that really was very, very pro-Israel at that time. And they used to go around and make bazaars and stuff like that and raise money to send to Israel. And it was very sad. He died very young. He was only about 50 or something. He died suddenly, and she remained in Hamilton for a long time. But then she went to live with her daughter, Shulamit, I think it was, in California. And she lived till 100. But the organization, there was a lot of organizations here in Hamilton.
Well, and you're saying that the Arbiter Ring
Yes,
was very pro-Israel?
they were.
Really?
Yes, yes. And they used to make concerts. It was 25 or 50 cents to go. And they used to go around, the women, not the men. The women used to go around knocking on doors and would get 25 cents, 50 cents, because they didn't have money at that time. And yet they used to raise a few $100s a year, maybe more. If you want to know more about the Arbiter Ring and the way they were here in Hamilton, you'll have to ask his daughter, what's her name now? I was at a meeting once with her, Cohen.
Pearl Cohen?
Pearl Cohen. Pearl Cohen still has her father's minutes from the organization.
She's a former, from the founding members of Pioneer Women.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep. She was.
Aside from, you were saying a moment ago that there were a number of different organizations.
Yes. Yes.
So there was the Arbiter Ring.
Yes.
Who else was here?
I don't know.
Pioneer Women here?
Not yet. They started around the time, well, there's a joke, he tells it, Joey Rochberg. You know Joey Rochberg?
Rochford.
Rochberg.
Yeah.
Joey Rochberg. He always kidded and said he slept with gold in my ear.
Because she came here, didn't
She came here to Hamilton, and she didn't have where to stay, so one of the women, his parents, his mother, invited her in, and he, you know, we didn't have the kind of homes that we have now, and he slept with her. He was just a little boy.
So he's a native
A
Hamiltonian?
native Hamiltonian.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yes, I remember his parents getting married. That shows you how old I am. It wasn't that I was so young at the time, but everybody lived on Cannon Street and York Street.
Right.
And I knew his grandparents. He had wonderful grandparents. His grandfather, he was the gabbai in Toronto in the big shul. I don't know if it was the English shul or one of the big shuls. His grandparents were there. And I remember when they lived on Cannon Street. God, we lived with the Waxmans, Herschel Waxman. Now I'm going to tell you a story, and this is the truth. And we often say things like that could never happen again here in Hamilton, or anything that I know of. My uncle, Israel Zucker, brought my parents over from Poland. He had a jewelry store on York Street, right near the market. Now, we don't have a market like that market was. Right in the middle of the city of Hamilton, they had this big farmers market. In the summer, they would come with all the fresh produce. In fact, they tried it. In the winter, they couldn't come because everything was frozen if they stayed out there in the market. So it would start in the spring, and they would bring, it was strictly farmers. And they came there and they brought all their produce, and it was very, very nice. I remember there they had, the kids used to go to see the pets. They had pets there in cages, and chickens and geese and all that kind of stuff there. Anyways, as I say, my uncle had a jewelry store on York Street, right near the market. And everybody waited for Saturday for the farmers to come in, you know, and there was a bank on the corner there. There were two banks, excuse me. And it was a very lively center of the city. Now, my uncle brought my parents over. My father wrote to my uncle in 1919. He was drafted into the army in Poland. He was only about 18 years old at the time. He didn't want to go because they were so terrible to the Jewish people. If they got a Jew in a regiment, he was just considered dirt. No matter, your life was at stake just like the Polish, but it didn't work like that. Anyways, my father wrote a letter to my uncle and said, please get me out of here if you possibly can. Get me a visa. They used to call it a Schiffskarte. And my uncle said yes. Now, there was a Mr. Schechter here in Hamilton. There was, did you know his son Schechter, the one was the doctor?
Jack.
Jack Schechter. He was the youngest of them all. But he used to bring people over. He used to get the Schiffskarte for them, and he would bring them over here to Hamilton. So my uncle was a friend of his and said, okay, he'll get him a Schiffskarte. It wasn't that easy to get. But my father wrote back, he would only come if he could bring his girlfriend. Now, my grandmother, from my father's side, did not like my mother. She figured, it wasn't so much she didn't like my mother, she didn't like my mother's family. She felt they were not yichtistic enough for her. After all, her husband was a teacher at the yeshiva in Lublin, and my grandfather was only a tailor. And she was very much against the marriage, but my father says, no way. My parents started to go out when they were about 16 years old. They lived across the road from each other. I'm just going to take a drink for now. No, I got water here.
Oh, okay, good.
Anyways, my father was adamant. He's not going without my mother. And they got a Schiffskarte for her. But my grandmother would not let them get married. And my other grandmother, from the Lettermans, my mother's side, she says, "It's shame. How can you send a boy and a girl not married, on a trip like this all the way back to Canada?" But she was adamant. So when my parents came here to Hamilton, they got married in Hamilton. My uncle's place, he lived over the store on York Street, and my parents got married here. Anyways, my father didn't have a trade or anything like that, so my uncle tried to, said, you know what, I'll set you up in a jewelry store, just like I have here. And they rented a store on James Street North. The store is still there. Next door to the bank. There's a bank there on the corner. Anyways, by that time I came along. They lived in the back of the store. And my father did not make a go of it. So he got a letter from the people, the renters, that they're going to put him out. My mother didn't want to go back to my uncle's because they had a full house up there. You know, there was about 6 kids there. My mother said, another one, me, like, you know, my mother with me and my father. She didn't want to come back. So they went to a delicatessen, Zieskind Bolslavsky. Now, he was a very influential man in Hamilton. How was he influential? First of all, he had the store, a delicatessen on York Street. Everybody that came to Hamilton used to go in through his place. You had to go in there. Where are you going to go where a bunch of Jews are? Everybody was there at Zieskind's. It was like a club at night. Everybody would go over there for a bottle of pop. You would sit there all night. Anyways, my father didn't know what to do. So he went one night to Zieskind's, and he said to the men there, they were all sitting around playing cards, just talking or something, and he says, people, I'm in deep trouble. I am being put out of my Woning, where I'm living, and I have no place to go. And I have no money, and I haven't got a job. What can I do? So there was one man there, Herschel Waxman, and he said to my father, he says, you know, Yechiel, I have an attic. They lived at that time at 161 Cannon Street West. And he says, you can come and live with us. You can live on the 3rd floor. I won't charge you anything. You come and live there as long as you can, and we'll see what we can do to get you a job or something like that. So that's what happened. They came, Herschel came with his wagon, took the few things that my parents had, and brought us on to Cannon Street. We lived there for 8 years with them. Not on the, we descended from the attic to the 2nd floor. And then my uncle lived on Murray Street, and his neighbor died. One of his neighbors died, and he said to my father, Yechiel, you got to buy that house. My father says, I haven't got any money. He used to give me 50 cents a week in the school. At that time, they had a bank. You used to give them, give the teacher the 50 cents a week, and they would put it in the bank for you. Anyways, I think they had about $200 or $300 accumulated, and that's how they bought the house. Our house on Murray Street. And we moved there on Murray Street, and this was a nice street, you know, supposed to be. But anyways, I think we always remained excellent friends of the Waxmans. Whenever my parents could help them, they did. And it just shows you, I don't think there's anybody in Hamilton that would do that again. Do you know of anybody that would do that? Take a family in?
Yeah, probably.
You do?
I think so.
Well, maybe there is,
Yeah,
but
it's unusual.
I thought it was very unusual. I don't know. I don't know. I used to talk about it with my sisters and say, would you take in people like that? No, I don't think so. You know, it was a marvelous thing that they did.
Absolutely.